The autumn morning at Windsor Castle began like any other, with staff members quietly going about their duties in the long corridors. Princess Anne had arrived early for a scheduled meeting about her upcoming royal engagements. She walked through the East Wing with her usual brisk pace, nodding politely to the household staff who stopped to bow or curtsy as she passed. The Princess Royal had always been known for her no-nonsense attitude and her dedication to royal duties, often completing more engagements than any other member of the family each year. As she turned the corner near the private apartments, Anne noticed something unusual. One of the senior security guards, Thomas Whitfield, was standing alone in the hallway, looking visibly distressed. His normally composed face showed signs of inner turmoil, and his hands trembled slightly as he held his clipboard. Anne had known Thomas for nearly 15 years. He was a reliable, professional man who had never shown such emotion during his service. Something was clearly wrong, and approached him with concern. Thomas immediately straightened up and bowed, but Anne could see the conflict in his eyes. She asked him directly if everything was all right, and for a moment Thomas seemed to struggle with whether to speak. The hallway was quiet, with no other staff members nearby, and assured him that he could speak freely, and whatever was troubling him would be handled appropriately. The weight of what he was carrying seemed perfect, heavy to bear alone any longer. Thomas took a deep breath and asked if they could speak somewhere private. Anne, sensing the gravity of the situation, led him to a small sitting room nearby. Once the door was closed, Thomas began to explain what he had witnessed 2 days earlier. He had been on duty near the family quarters when he saw Queen Camilla and young Princess Charlotte in one of the private corridors. Charlotte, who was only 8 years old, had been carrying some of her schoolwork and appeared excited about something she wanted to show her. Grandmother, what Thomas witnessed next, shocked him to his core. According to his account, Camilla had dismissed Charlotte harshly when the young princess approached her. But it was not just the words that troubled Thomas. He described how Camilla had grabbed Charlotte's arm roughly and pushed the child aside when Charlotte had accidentally bumped into her while trying to show her drawings. The little princess had dropped her papers, which scattered across the floor. Thomas said he watched as Charlotte bent down to pick them up, tears streaming down her face. While Camilla simply walked away without even looking back, Thomas explained that he had been paralyzed in the moment, unsure of how to react to what he was seeing. As a security guard, he was trained to protect the royal family, but he had never been prepared to witness one family member treating another, especially a child, in such a manner. He said Charlotte had gathered her papers quickly and run off down the corridor, still crying. Thomas had wanted to comfort the young princess, but knew it was not his place to intervene in family matters. However, the image of that little girl's face had haunted him for the past 2 days. Anne listened to every word, her expression growing darker with each detail. She asked Thomas specific questions about the timing, the location, and exactly what was said. Thomas provided all the information he could remember, though he admitted that some of Camilla's words to Charlotte had been spoken too quietly for him to hear clearly. What he did hear was Camilla telling Charlotte to stop being such a nuisance and to stay out of her way. The coldness in her tone, Thomas said, was something he would never forget. The Princess Royal asked Thomas why he had waited 2 days to report this incident. Thomas explained that he had been torn between his duty to remain discreet about private, family matters, and his conscience about what he had witnessed. He had initially convinced himself that perhaps he had misunderstood the situation, or that it was a one-time occurrence caused by stress or a bad day. However, the guilt had been eating away at him. He felt that if Charlotte were any other child, the incident would be considered unacceptable treatment, and her status as a royal princess should not make it any less serious. Anne thanked Thomas for his courage in coming forward. She assured him that he had done the right thing and that his position would be protected. She asked him to write down everything he had witnessed in detail and to keep the matter confidential for now until she could investigate further. Thomas nodded, clearly relieved to have shared his burden, but also anxious about the potential consequences. Anne told him that the welfare of the children in the family was paramount, and that no one, regardless of their position, should treat a child in such a manner. After Thomas left the room, Anne sat alone for several minutes, her mind racing. She had always prioritized the younger members of the royal family, believing that they deserve to grow up in an environment of love and support despite the unusual circumstances of their lives. Charlotte was a sweet, sensitive child who adored her great-aunt, Anne. The thought of anyone treating her roughly made Anne's blood boil. She knew she needed to verify Thomas's account before taking any action. But something in his demeanor told her that he was telling the truth. Anne decided to speak with Charlotte directly, but she needed to do so carefully. She could not simply ask the child outright without potentially putting her in an uncomfortable position or making her feel like she was betraying her grandmother. Instead, Anne invited Charlotte for tea that afternoon, something she did occasionally when she wanted to spend time with her great-niece. Charlotte arrived at Anne's apartments with her nanny, excited to see her great-aunt. The little girl loved these visits because Anne always listened to her stories and never made her feel like her interests were silly or unimportant. During their tea, Anne gently steered the conversation toward Charlotte's week. She asked about school, her friends, and what she had been doing around the castle. Charlotte chatted happily about most topics. But when Anne casually mentioned seeing Camilla earlier, she noticed an immediate change in Charlotte's demeanor. The little girl became quieter and focused intently on her teacup. Anne, using her decades of experience in reading people, recognized the signs of a child who was hiding something troubling. Anne asked Charlotte if everything was all right with her grandmother Camilla. Charlotte hesitated, then said that everything was fine, but her voice lacked conviction. Anne gently pressed, saying that she had heard Charlotte might have had a small accident with some papers and wondered if she could help. At this, Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. The little girl tried to hold them back, but soon she was crying softly, and immediately moved to sit beside her, putting a comforting arm around her shoulders. She told Charlotte that she was safe and that she could tell her anything. Through her tears, Charlotte explained what had happened. She said she had been so excited to show Grandma Camilla the drawings she had made of the family because her teacher had praised them. But when she approached Camilla, her grandmother had seemed angry about something. Charlotte admitted that she might have been a bit too enthusiastic and had accidentally bumped into Camilla while trying to show her the drawings. She said Camilla had grabbed her arm and told her she was being annoying. Charlotte demonstrated how Camilla had pushed her, causing her to drop all her papers. The worst part, Charlotte said, is that Camilla had walked away without helping her pick anything up or even saying sorry. Charlotte asked Anne if she had done something wrong to make Grandma Camilla so angry. The innocent question broke Anne's heart. She immediately assured Charlotte that she had done absolutely nothing wrong and that being excited to show someone your work was a wonderful thing, and explained that sometimes adults have bad days and react in ways they should not, but that this was never the child's fault. She told Charlotte that she was a lovely, kind girl and that her enthusiasm and creativity were things to be celebrated, not punished, and asked Charlotte if anything like this had happened before. Charlotte thought for a moment, then quietly admitted that Grandma Camilla sometimes seemed impatient with her and her brother George, especially when they were excited or loud. She said that Camilla had told them on several occasions that they needed to learn to be quieter and more composed because they were royal children. Charlotte said it made her feel like she always had to be careful around Grandma Camilla, never quite sure if she would be in trouble for just being herself. This revelation deeply troubled Anne. Children, especially young children, should not have to walk on eggshells around family members. The royal life was already restrictive enough without adding emotional stress within the family circle. Anne spent the rest of the tea time reassuring Charlotte, playing games with her, and making sure she left feeling happier and more secure. Before Charlotte departed, Anne told her that if anything ever made her uncomfortable or upset, she should always feel free to talk to her parents, or other grandparents, or to Anne herself. Charlotte hugged her tightly and thanked her for the lovely afternoon. Once Charlotte had gone, Anne's expression hardened with determination. She now had confirmation directly from Charlotte that matched Thomas's account. This was not a misunderstanding or an exaggeration. A vulnerable child had been treated roughly and emotionally hurt by someone who should have been providing love and guidance. Anne knew that confronting Camilla directly might not be the best first step, as it could lead to denial or defensiveness. She needed to speak with her brother Charles first, though she dreaded the conversation. Charles had waited so long for his marriage to Camilla to be accepted by the public and the family, and this revelation would devastate him. However, Anne's loyalty was first and foremost to the vulnerable members of the family and to the values the monarchy should represent. If Charles was to be an effective king, he needed to know what was happening within his own household. Anne decided she would request a private meeting with her brother the next day. She spent the evening gathering her thoughts and preparing for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. She also made sure to have Thomas's written statement secured in case. Charles needed to see evidence beyond Charlotte's tearful admission. The next morning, Anne sent a formal request for a private audience with the king. Charles's secretary, somewhat surprised by the urgent tone of the request, scheduled the meeting for that afternoon. When Anne arrived at Charles's study, her brother greeted her warmly, asking what was so urgent. Anne's serious expression immediately concerned him. She asked if they could speak without any interruptions, and if he could ensure complete privacy. Charles, now genuinely worried, agreed immediately and dismissed his staff, closing the door behind them. Anne began carefully, but directly. She told Charles that she needed to discuss a serious matter concerning Charlotte, and that what she was about to share would be difficult to hear. Charles's face showed immediate concern for his granddaughter. Anne then recounted Thomas's testimony and her subsequent conversation with Charlotte. She watched as her brother's expression changed from concern to shock to anger. Charles interrupted several times to ask for clarification, clearly hoping that there had been some misunderstanding. Anne provided every detail, including Charlotte's admission about feeling like she had to be careful around Camilla. Charles stood up and walked to the window, his back to Anne. The silence in the room was heavy. Finally, he turned around, and Anne could see the conflict in his eyes. He asked if Anne was absolutely certain about her facts. Anne assured him that she was offering to have him speak with Thomas directly if needed. Charles ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Anne recognized from childhood when their brother was deeply troubled. He said he could not believe Camilla would intentionally hurt Charlotte, suggesting perhaps it was a moment of stress or that Charlotte had misunderstood. Anne remained firm but compassionate. She told Charles that she understood his desire to defend his wife, but that they could not ignore or minimize what had happened. She reminded him that Charlotte was an 8-year-old child who should feel safe and loved in her own family home. Anne pointed out that if this had happened to any other child, Charles himself would demand accountability. The fact that Camilla was his wife did not change. The fundamental issue that a child had been treated roughly and emotionally hurt, and emphasized that this was not about destroying Charles's marriage, but about ensuring the well-being of the youngest members of their family. Charles sat down heavily in his chair. He admitted that he had noticed Camilla seemed stressed lately, often impatient with the constant demands of royal life. He said that Camilla had mentioned several times that she found the children's energy exhausting, but he had not thought much of it, assuming it was normal for someone adjusting to having young children frequently present. Anne pointed out that feeling tired was one thing, but physical roughness and emotional coldness toward a child was entirely different. She asked Charles what he intended to do about the situation, making it clear that doing nothing was not an option. Charles said he needed time to think and to speak with Camilla privately. Anne agreed that he should talk to his wife, but she insisted that action needed to be taken to ensure Charlotte felt safe and that appropriate boundaries were established. She also suggested that perhaps Camilla needed support in managing the stress of royal life, but that Charlotte's welfare had to come first. Anne told Charles that she expected him to take this matter seriously and to keep her informed of how he planned to address it. She reminded him that as king, he had a responsibility not just to the nation, but to his own family, and that leadership began at home. Charles sat in silence for several minutes after Anne left his study, staring at the papers on his desk without really seeing them. The weight of what his sister had just revealed pressed down on him like a physical burden. He had worked so hard to build a stable family life with Camilla. To see her accepted by the public and the family after decades of controversy, now he was faced with an accusation that threatened not just his marriage, but the very image of harmony he had tried so carefully to create. Yet beneath his instinct to defend his wife was a deeper fear that perhaps Anne was right, that something he should have noticed had been happening under his own roof. That evening, Charles asked Camilla to join him in their private sitting room after dinner. She arrived cheerfully, talking about the day's events and some upcoming engagements. Charles let her talk for a few minutes before gently interrupting her. He said he needed to discuss something serious and asked her to sit down. Camilla's smile faded as she recognized the gravity in her husband's tone. She sat across from him, her hands folding nervously in her lap. Charles took a deep breath and asked her directly about the incident with Charlotte 2 days prior in the corridor near the family quarters. Camilla's face immediately showed recognition of what he was referring to, followed quickly by a flash of defensiveness. She asked who had been talking about it, her tone sharp. Charles said that was not the important question right now. What mattered was understanding what had happened. Camilla sighed and said it was being blown completely out of proportion. She explained that she had been having a terrible morning. Having just received criticism from the press about one of her recent public appearances, she was rushing to a meeting when Charlotte came running up to her with papers flying everywhere, practically crashing into her. Camilla said she had simply steadied the child and asked her to be more careful. Charles listened quietly, then asked about the specific details. He mentioned that Charlotte had been left crying in the hallway, and that Camilla had walked away without helping her pick up her dropped papers. Camilla's expression shifted to one of irritation. She said that Charlotte was far too sensitive and needed to learn that the world did not stop for every little drama. She pointed out that royal children needed to develop thicker skin and learn self-control. Camilla added that Catherine and William were too soft on the children, constantly coddling them instead of preparing them for the harsh realities of royal life. Charles felt his concern deepening as Camilla spoke. He carefully explained that Charlotte was only 8 years old, and that there was a difference between teaching resilience and being harsh. He asked Camilla directly if she had grabbed Charlotte's arm roughly and pushed her. Camilla hesitated, then admitted that she might have been a bit firm in moving Charlotte out of her way, but insisted she had not hurt the child. She said Charlotte was being dramatic about the whole thing, typical of children who were used to getting constant attention and praise. Camilla's tone suggested she felt victimized by the situation rather than concerned about Charlotte's feelings. Charles then mentioned that Charlotte had told Anne she often felt nervous around Camilla, afraid of making her angry. This seemed to genuinely surprise Camilla, though she quickly dismissed it. She said children often invented stories or exaggerated things for attention. Camilla pointed out that she had always been perfectly civil to the Cambridge children, and that Charlotte felt uncomfortable. Perhaps it was because Catherine had been poisoning the children against her. This accusation shocked Charles. He firmly told Camilla that Catherine had never done anything of the sort, that blaming others was not helpful in this situation. The conversation grew more heated. Camilla accused Charles of taking everyone's side but hers, of always doubting her when any problem arose. She said she had given up everything to be with him, had endured years of public hatred and criticism. And now, even within the family, she was being treated as the villain. Charles tried to remain calm, explaining that this was not about taking sides, but about ensuring a child felt safe. Camilla stood up abruptly, saying that perhaps the problem was that people expected her to be something she was not. She had never been naturally maternal, she admitted, and she found young children exhausting and disruptive to her routine. This admission hung in the air between them. Charles felt a chill run through him. He had known Camilla was not particularly drawn to children, but he had assumed she would make an effort with his grandchildren for his sake. The realization that she viewed them primarily as inconveniences rather than as beloved family members troubled him deeply. Charles asked Camilla if she understood how serious this situation was, that physically pushing a child and leaving her crying was not acceptable behavior regardless of stress or personal preference. Camilla said she thought everyone was overreacting, and that children needed to learn that adults had more important things to do than constantly attend to their needs. Charles stood and walked to where Camilla was standing. He looked at his wife with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. He told her that he loved her, but that love did not mean ignoring serious problems. He said that the way she had treated Charlotte was unacceptable, and that changes needed to happen immediately. Camilla asked what kind of changes he meant, her voice rising defensively. Charles explained that she needed to apologize to Charlotte properly, not just a quick sorry, but a genuine acknowledgement of how she had made the child feel. Additionally, he said they needed to establish clearer boundaries. About her interactions with the children, until she could approach them with more patience and warmth, Camilla reacted with outrage. She said she would not be treated like some kind of criminal in her own home over a minor incident that had been completely exaggerated. She accused Anne of stirring up trouble because she had never fully accepted Camilla into the family. Charles defended his sister, saying Anne had only done what she should do when a child's well-being was at stake. He told Camilla that her refusal to see the problem was part of the problem itself. If she could not understand why leaving an 8-year-old crying in a hallway was wrong, then they had a much bigger issue to address. The argument continued for over an hour, with neither of them willing to fully concede ground. Camilla insisted she was being unfairly persecuted, while Charles tried to make her understand the gravity of the situation. Finally exhausted, Charles told Camilla that he would be speaking with William and Catherine in the morning to inform them of what had happened and to discuss how to move forward. Camilla protested, saying that would only make things worse and turn the whole family against her. Charles replied that he would not hide this from Charlotte's parents, and that they deserved to know what had occurred. Camilla left the room in anger, slamming the door behind her. Charles barely slept that night, lying awake and replaying the conversation in his mind. He felt torn between his love for his wife and his responsibility to his grandchildren and his role as king. By morning, he had made his decision. He called William and asked him to come to Windsor Castle with Catherine for an urgent meeting. William, sensing the seriousness in his father's voice, agreed immediately. They arrived that afternoon, both looking concerned. Charles met them in his private office and asked them to sit down, then slowly and carefully explained everything that had happened. From Thomas's report to Anne's investigation to his own confrontation with Camilla, William's reaction was immediate and intense. His face flushed with anger as he listened to how his daughter had been treated. He stood up and began pacing, asking why he was only hearing about this days after it happened. Catherine, though calmer in demeanor, was visibly upset. She asked detailed questions about exactly what Charlotte had said and how upset she had been. Charles provided all the information he had, not minimizing any aspect of the incident. Catherine said this explained why Charlotte had seemed unusually quiet and withdrawn for the past few days. She had asked Charlotte several times if something was wrong, but her daughter had insisted everything was fine. William demanded to know what Charles planned to do about the situation. Charles explained that he had confronted Camilla, but that she remained largely defensive and unwilling to fully acknowledge the severity of her actions. William said that was not good enough, that Camilla needed to be held accountable just as anyone else would be. Catherine added that Charlotte was a sensitive child who would internalize this experience, potentially affecting her confidence and her relationship with authority figures going forward. She said they needed to address this not just for the immediate situation, but for Charlotte's long-term emotional well-being. Charles agreed completely and said he wanted to work with them to find the best path forward. William, still angry, said that his first instinct was to keep Charlotte away from Camilla entirely. Charles understood the impulse but cautioned that such a drastic step would create a public relations crisis and might not be the healthiest solution for Charlotte either, as it could make her feel like she had done something wrong. Catherine suggested that perhaps supervised interactions with clear boundaries might be appropriate, along with professional support to help Charlotte process what had happened and rebuild her sense of security. The three of them spent hours discussing options. William insisted that Camilla needed to apologize to Charlotte in person and in a meaningful way. Charles agreed but said Camilla needed time to move past her defensiveness first. Catherine proposed that perhaps Camilla would benefit from speaking with a counselor about managing stress and interacting with children more appropriately. William was skeptical that Camilla would agree to such a thing, but Charles said he would insist upon it as a condition for moving forward. They also agreed that Anne should be kept informed of all decisions since she had been the one to bring the situation to light, and Charlotte clearly trusted her. That evening, Charles had another conversation with Camilla, this time with William present at his son's insistence. Camilla was clearly uncomfortable facing both of them. Charles laid out what needed to happen moving forward. First, Camilla would apologize to Charlotte within the next 2 days in a genuine and appropriate way. Second, Camilla would agree to speak with a therapist about stress management and appropriate interactions with children. Third, any future interactions between Camilla and the Cambridge children would be supervised until trust could be rebuilt. Fourth, if any similar incident occurred in the future, there would be more serious consequences. Camilla listened with a tight expression. When Charles finished, she said that she felt she was being treated like a child herself, being given rules and conditions. William spoke up, his voice controlled but firm. He told Camilla that she had treated his daughter roughly and left her crying, and that as Charlotte's father, he had every right to ensure such a thing never happened again. He said that if she could not accept these reasonable conditions, then Charlotte would not be around her at all. Camilla looked between the two men, realizing she had little choice if she wanted to maintain any relationship with the family. After a long pause, Camilla agreed to the conditions, though her tone suggested resentment rather than genuine remorse. Charles took some comfort in the agreement, even if the spirit was lacking. He hoped that with time and proper support, Camilla might come to understand why this mattered so much. William was less optimistic, but satisfied that at least concrete steps were being taken. Before leaving, William made it clear that he would be monitoring the situation closely and that Charlotte's well-being was his absolute priority, above all other family considerations or public image concerns. The next day, Anne was informed of all the decisions that had been made. She expressed satisfaction that the matter was being taken seriously but shared William's concerns about whether Camilla truly understood the problem. Anne suggested that she be present when Camilla apologized to Charlotte, both to support her great-niece and to ensure the apology was handled appropriately. Charles agreed this was wise. They scheduled the apology for the following afternoon at Anne's residence, a neutral location where Charlotte would feel safe and supported. Catherine prepared Charlotte carefully for the meeting, explaining that Grandma Camilla wanted to talk to her about what had happened in the corridor. Charlotte immediately became anxious, asking if she was in trouble. Catherine assured her that she absolutely was not in trouble and that nothing that happened was her fault. She explained that sometimes adults make mistakes and need to say sorry, just like children do. Catherine told Charlotte that Great-Aunt Anne would be there with them, that she and her father would be right outside if Charlotte needed them. This seemed to calm Charlotte somewhat, though she remained nervous. When they arrived at Anne's residence, Charlotte held tightly to her mother's hand. Anne greeted them warmly and took Charlotte to a comfortable sitting room. She had prepared with some of Charlotte's favorite treats and toys nearby. When Camilla arrived, accompanied by Charles, the atmosphere was tense. Charlotte shrank back slightly when she saw her grandmother. Anne placed a reassuring hand on Charlotte's shoulder. Camilla sat down across from Charlotte, and after a prompting look from Charles, she began to speak. Camilla told Charlotte that she wanted to apologize for what had happened in the corridor. She said she had been having a bad day, but that was no excuse for being unkind. Camilla admitted that she had been too rough when she moved Charlotte aside, and that she should have helped pick up the papers instead of walking away. She said she was sorry for making Charlotte feel bad and for leaving her crying in the hallway. The apology, while covering the necessary points, was delivered somewhat stiffly, lacking the warmth that would have made it feel fully genuine. Charlotte listened quietly, her eyes downcast. When Camilla finished, Anne gently encouraged Charlotte to share if she wanted to say anything. Charlotte looked up at Camilla and asked in a small voice if Grandma Camilla was still angry with her. Camilla looked uncomfortable but said no, she was not angry. Charlotte then asked if she had been annoying like Grandma Camilla had said. This question seemed to catch Camilla off guard, and for the first time something shifted in her expression. She reached out slowly and took Charlotte's small hand, telling her that she was not annoying at all and that Camilla should never have said that. This moment of genuine connection seemed to affect everyone in the room. Camilla's voice softened as she told Charlotte that being excited and wanting to share things were wonderful qualities. She said that Charlotte should never feel like she had to hide her enthusiasm or walk on eggshells around anyone in the family. For the first time since the incident began, Camilla seemed to grasp the real impact of her actions on this vulnerable child. Charlotte, with the resilience and forgiveness that children often possess, asked if they could start over and try to be nicer to each other. Camilla agreed, and Charlotte gave her a tentative hug. After the apology session ended, Catherine took Charlotte home while the adults remained to discuss next steps. Anne watched as Charles and Camilla prepared to leave, noticing the strain between them. Once they had gone, Anne felt a mixture of relief and lingering concern. The apology had gone better than expected in the end, but she knew that one conversation would not solve deeper issues. She made a mental note to check in with Charlotte regularly over the coming weeks to ensure the child was genuinely recovering from the incident, and not just putting on a brave face for the adults, true to the agreement. Camilla began meeting with Dr. Margaret Thornton, a therapist who specialized in stress management and family dynamics. The sessions were held discreetly at one of the royal residences to maintain privacy. During their first meeting, Camilla was defensive, insisting she was only there because she had been forced to attend. Dr. Thornton, experienced with resistant clients, did not push back but instead asked Camilla to describe her typical day and the pressures she faced. As Camilla began talking about the constant scrutiny, the never-ending obligations, and the feeling that she could never fully satisfy everyone's expectations, her walls began to lower slightly. Over the following sessions, Dr. Thornton helped Camilla explore the sources of her stress and frustration. Camilla admitted that she had never wanted to be a maternal figure to anyone beyond her own children, who were now adults. The expectation that she would naturally bond with her step-grandchildren felt overwhelming, especially given her age and energy levels. Dr. Thornton validated these feelings while also helping Camilla understand that her internal struggles did not justify taking frustrations out on children. They worked on developing better coping strategies and techniques for managing her reactions when feeling overwhelmed. A significant breakthrough came during their fourth session when Dr. Thornton asked Camilla to imagine how she would have felt as a child if an adult had treated her the way she had treated Charlotte. Camilla was quiet for a long time before admitting that she would have been devastated and confused. This exercise seemed to help Camilla develop genuine empathy for Charlotte's experience. She began to understand that her actions, no matter how justified they felt in the moment, had real emotional consequences for a vulnerable child. Dr. Thornton used this opening to help Camilla see the difference between setting boundaries appropriately and reacting harshly out of frustration. Meanwhile, Anne maintained regular contact with Charlotte through their scheduled tea times and occasional outings. During these visits, Anne observed Charlotte carefully for signs of lasting trauma or anxiety. Initially, Charlotte seemed nervous when Camilla was mentioned, but as weeks passed and supervised positive interactions occurred, the child began to relax. Anne noticed that Charlotte no longer tensed up when she saw Camilla at family gatherings, though she was not quite as spontaneously affectionate as she was with other family members. Anne considered this a reasonable outcome given what had happened. Catherine and William also worked with Charlotte at home, helping her understand that she had done nothing wrong and that she had every right to feel safe and respected in her family. They encouraged her to express her feelings rather than hiding them and assured her that they would always listen if something bothered her. Charlotte's natural resilience and the strong support system around her helped her process the incident in a healthy way. She continued to thrive at school and in her friendships, showing no signs of the withdrawn behavior that had concerned Catherine. Immediately after the corridor incident, Thomas Whitfield, the guard who had initially reported the incident, was relieved to see that his decision to speak up had led to positive changes. Anne made sure to personally thank him for his courage and integrity. She told him that his willingness to prioritize a child's well-being over workplace politics reflected the best values of royal service. Thomas admitted he had been worried about potential retaliation, but was grateful that the family had taken the matter seriously, and assured him that his position was secure and that he had done exactly what any decent person should do when witnessing a child in distress. As autumn turned to winter, the family settled into new patterns of interaction. Camilla's supervised visits with the Cambridge children gradually became more relaxed. Charles often joined these interactions, providing an additional buffer and modeling warm engagement with his grandchildren. Camilla made genuine efforts to be more patient, asking about the children's interests and praising their accomplishments. While these interactions never achieved the natural warmth that existed between the children and their other grandparents, they were respectful and pleasant, and observed these changes with cautious optimism. During family gatherings at Sandringham for Christmas, She noticed Camilla making an effort to include Charlotte in conversations and being more mindful of the children's presence. One afternoon, Anne watched as Charlotte showed Camilla a new drawing, approaching cautiously but with growing confidence. Camilla examined the picture carefully and offered specific, genuine compliments about Charlotte's use of color and detail. Charlotte beamed at the praise, and Anne felt her shoulders relax slightly. Progress was being made, even if slowly. However, not everyone was satisfied with how the situation had been handled. Several staff members who had heard whispers about the incident felt that Camilla had gotten off too lightly. There was quiet resentment in some quarters that the Queen Consort had faced no public accountability for her actions. Thomas, during a casual conversation with a colleague in the staff quarters, mentioned his frustration that while the internal family dynamics had improved, there had been no broader acknowledgement that what happened was unacceptable. His colleague agreed, adding that if any staff member had treated a royal child that way, they would have been immediately dismissed. This conversation was overheard by Sarah Mitchell, a junior member of the household staff who had always admired Charlotte and been troubled by rumors about the incident. Sarah had a friend who worked for a tabloid newspaper and had often shared harmless royal gossip with her in the past. The temptation to share this more significant story began to gnaw at Sarah. She told herself that the public had a right to know. If someone in a position of influence was treating royal children poorly, she rationalized that bringing the incident to light might prevent future occurrences and hold powerful people accountable. After wrestling with her conscience for several days, Sarah contacted her friend at the newspaper. She provided a carefully sanitized version of what had happened, omitting Thomas's name, but describing the corridor incident and the subsequent family meetings. She convinced herself she was doing the right thing by exposing what she saw as a covered-up scandal. The journalist, recognizing the explosive potential of the story, immediately brought it to her editor. Within 24 hours, the newspaper's investigative team was working to verify details and develop sources to corroborate Sarah's account. The newspaper reached out to several palace contacts, asking indirect questions about tensions between Camilla and the Cambridge children. Most sources refused to comment, but the questions themselves signaled that a story was brewing. The palace press office became aware that inquiries were being made but did not initially understand the full scope of what the newspaper had learned. By the time the palace realized a major story was about to break, it was too late to effectively contain it. The newspaper informed the palace they would be running the story the following morning and requested official comment. Charles was informed of the impending publication late in the evening. He immediately called an emergency meeting with his private secretary, William, Catherine, and Anne. The mood was grim as they discussed how to respond. William was furious that private family matters were being exposed publicly, especially ones that directly affected his daughter. Anne, while also angry about the breach of privacy, was more pragmatic about the need to control the narrative before it spiraled out of control. Catherine's primary concern was protecting Charlotte from public scrutiny and media attention. They debated various response strategies through the night. Some advisors recommended a strongly worded denial and threats of legal action. Others suggested acknowledging a minor disagreement while downplaying its significance. Anne argued forcefully against either approach. She insisted that denying something that had genuinely occurred would be dishonest and might lead to more damaging revelations. If staff members felt compelled to prove their accounts, similarly, minimizing what had happened would send the wrong message about how seriously the family took the well-being of children. Anne proposed a middle ground of acknowledging that an incident had occurred, that it had been addressed internally through appropriate channels, and that the family remained united. William was torn between his instinct to protect his family's privacy and his recognition that Anne's approach might be the most credible. Catherine agreed with Anne, pointing out that in the modern media environment, attempts to cover up or minimize scandals often backfired spectacularly. Charles, exhausted and emotionally drained, ultimately sided with Anne's recommendation. They drafted a careful statement acknowledging that a private family matter had been resolved internally with appropriate support and counseling, emphasizing the family's commitment to the well-being of all its members, particularly the children. The statement was released early the next morning, just before the newspaper published its story. The headline was sensational, as expected, describing Camilla's treatment of Charlotte in dramatic terms and questioning whether the queen consort was fit to be around the young royals. The story included anonymous staff accounts that corroborated the basic facts while adding emotional details about Charlotte being left in tears. Social media exploded with reactions, with many people expressing outrage at Camilla's behavior while others defended her or questioned the accuracy of the reporting. Within hours, the story had become international news. Television programs debated whether Camilla should step back from public duties. Online forums dissected every past interaction between Camilla and the Cambridge children, looking for signs of tension. Child welfare advocates weighed in on the importance of holding all adults accountable for how they treat children, regardless of status. The palace's measured response was praised by some for transparency, but criticized by others as insufficient accountability. The controversy dominated news cycles for days, with new angles and commentary emerging constantly. Catherine and William worked hard to shield Charlotte from the media storm. They kept her away from newspapers and television, maintaining her normal routine as much as possible. However, Charlotte was old enough to sense that something unusual was happening. When she asked why there were more photographers than usual outside her school, and why some of her friends, parents looked at her with extra sympathy. Catherine explained carefully that some private family matters had been discussed publicly without permission, but that everything was fine and Charlotte should not worry. Charlotte, mature beyond her 8 years, simply nodded and said she understood. Anne became a target of particular media attention. When anonymous sources suggested she had been instrumental in bringing the incident to light and demanding accountability, some outlets praised her as a champion of the vulnerable, describing her as the moral compass of the royal family. Others accused her of stirring up trouble and betraying family loyalty. Anne ignored the commentary, refusing all interview requests and maintaining her regular schedule of royal engagements. When asked about the controversy during a public event, she simply stated that the well-being of all family members, especially children, was always the family's priority, and she would not discuss private matters further. Camilla faced the harshest public judgment. Her favorability ratings, which had gradually improved over years of public service, plummeted overnight. Calls for her to apologize publicly or even step down from her role as queen consort came from various quarters. Camilla was devastated by the public pillorying, feeling that one mistake had erased years of effort to win acceptance. She retreated from public view for several days, appearing only at essential events. Charles stood by her publicly, making statements about the importance of privacy and proportionate responses to private family matters. But privately, he was frustrated with her for putting them all in this position. The incident also strained relationships within the extended royal family. Some members felt Anne had overreacted and that the whole matter could have been handled more quietly. Others supported Anne's actions and felt that taking a firm stand had been necessary. Family gatherings became tense, with underlying disagreements about how the situation had been managed threatening to surface. The unity that the family typically projected publicly was genuinely fractured privately, with different camps forming around different perspectives on what had happened and how it should have been addressed. Dr. Thornton continued working with Camilla through this difficult period, helping her process the public humiliation, while also continuing to address the underlying issues that had led to the original incident. Camilla struggled with feelings of victimization, believing she was being unfairly persecuted for one moment of poor judgment. Dr. Thornton gently but firmly pushed back, helping Camilla understand that public figures were held to higher standards and that her position came with both privileges and responsibilities. The public reaction, while perhaps disproportionate in its intensity, reflected genuine concern about how those in power treat vulnerable individuals. As weeks passed, the immediate media frenzy began to subside. Though the incident had left lasting impacts on public perception and family dynamics, opinion polls showed that while most people believed Camilla had acted wrongly, there was also sympathy for the idea that everyone makes mistakes and deserves opportunities for redemption. Younger respondents were generally less forgiving than older ones, reflecting generational differences and expectations about emotional intelligence and appropriate treatment of children. The incident became a case study in crisis management, with experts debating whether the palace's response had been effective or whether a different approach might have minimized the damage. 3 months after the story broke, the royal family was still dealing with the aftermath of the incident and its public exposure. The initial storm had passed, but the underlying tensions remained. Anne had become even more vigilant about the welfare of the younger royals, checking in regularly, not just with Charlotte, but also with George and Louis. She wanted to ensure that no child in the family felt unsafe or uncomfortable, and she made it clear to all family members that she would not hesitate to speak up again if necessary. Her stance earned her both respect and resentment from different quarters of the family. Camilla had made significant progress in her therapy sessions, developing genuine insight into how her stress and discomfort with children had manifested in harmful behavior. Dr. Thornton helped her recognize patterns from her own childhood, where emotional expression had been discouraged and children were expected to be seen but not heard. Camilla began to understand that she had unconsciously carried forward these outdated attitudes, applying them to her step-grandchildren without considering the emotional damage such an approach could cause. This realization was painful, but ultimately transformative for Camilla. During one particularly meaningful session, Dr. Thornton asked Camilla what kind of grandmother she wanted to be remembered as. Camilla broke down in tears, admitting that she had always feared she would fail at the role because it did not come naturally to her. She confessed that watching Charles interact so easily with his grandchildren made her feel inadequate and defensive. Dr. Thornton helped Camilla understand that there were many ways to show love and support, and that she did not need to be like Charles or anyone else. She could develop her own authentic way of connecting with the children that honored both their needs and her genuine personality. Inspired by this conversation, Camilla decided to make a more substantial effort to connect with Charlotte on the child's terms. Rather than expecting Charlotte to adapt to her preferences, she asked Catherine about Charlotte's interests and learned that the little princess loved art and stories about historical queens. Camilla, who had her own interest in literature and history, realized this could be common ground. She invited Charlotte to visit her private sitting room, which was filled with books and art, and offered to read stories together about famous queens from history. Charlotte, initially hesitant, was intrigued by the invitation. Their first reading session was somewhat awkward, with both Charlotte and Camilla unsure how to navigate their new dynamic. Camilla chose a beautifully illustrated book about Eleanor of Aquitaine, thinking Charlotte might enjoy learning about a strong female historical figure. As she read, Camilla found herself getting genuinely engaged with the story. Charlotte began asking thoughtful questions about Eleanor's life and choices. By the end of the session, they were having a real conversation rather than forcing interaction. Charlotte left with a smile, telling her mother that Grandma Camilla knew really interesting stories. This became a weekly tradition that both gradually looked forward to. Camilla discovered that when she let her genuine interests guide their interactions rather than trying to perform a role, connecting with Charlotte became easier and more rewarding. Charlotte, for her part, appreciated having her grandmother's undivided attention and learning about subjects that interested her. These sessions helped rebuild trust between them in a way that felt organic rather than forced. Anne, learning about these meetings from a delighted Charlotte, felt cautiously hopeful that real healing was occurring. Meanwhile, the investigation into how the story had been leaked to the press was ongoing. The palace took such breaches very seriously, as they threatened the privacy that allowed the family to function normally. Security reviewed communications and interviewed staff members who might have had knowledge of the incident. Sarah Mitchell, the staff member who had leaked the information, lived in constant fear of being discovered. The guilt had been eating away at her, especially after seeing how the public exposure had affected everyone involved, particularly Charlotte. What she had convinced herself was righteous, whistleblowing now felt like a betrayal that had caused unnecessary pain. Unable to bear the guilt any longer, Sarah requested a meeting with the palace's head of human resources. With trembling hands and tears streaming down her face, she confessed to being the source of the leak. She explained her reasoning, acknowledging that it had been misguided, and that she had not fully considered the consequences for Charlotte and the family. Sarah offered her resignation immediately, expecting to be fired and possibly face legal action. The HR director listened carefully and told Sarah that while her actions had serious consequences, her honesty in coming forward would be taken into account when determining the appropriate response. The matter was brought to Charles's attention. He was angry about the betrayal but also recognized that Sarah had acted from misguided concern rather than malicious intent. Anne, when consulted, argued that Sarah should face consequences for her actions, as accountability needed to be maintained for everyone involved in the situation, not just family members. However, Anne also noted that Sarah's voluntary confession showed character and suggested there might be value in mercy alongside justice. After extensive discussions, it was decided that Sarah would be transferred to a different role with no access to sensitive family information. But she would not be dismissed or prosecuted. She would also receive counseling to help her understand the gravity of her actions and develop better judgment. The resolution of the leak investigation brought some closure to that aspect of the crisis. The palace issued a brief statement noting that the source of the breach had been identified and appropriate internal action taken, without revealing Sarah's identity. This satisfied most observers' curiosity, while protecting Sarah from public vilification. Within the palace staff, word spread about Sarah's confession and the merciful but firm response. The incident served as a powerful reminder about the importance of discretion and the real human costs of betraying confidences, even with seemingly good intentions. As spring arrived, the family faced its first major public test since the scandal. A large royal event was planned that would require Camilla and the Cambridge children to appear together publicly for an extended period. There was considerable anxiety about how this would be received by both the media and the public. William and Catherine discussed at length whether to have Charlotte participate, weighing her emotional readiness against the message that her absence might send. After consulting with Charlotte herself, who insisted she was fine and wanted to attend, they decided the whole family would participate as planned. The event day arrived with unprecedented media attention focused on any interactions between Camilla and Charlotte. Photographers and cameras were trained on them, ready to capture any sign of tension or discomfort. Anne, also attending the event, made a point of staying near Charlotte to provide subtle support. As the event progressed, observers noticed that Camilla and Charlotte interacted naturally, with Camilla at one point kneeling down to speak with Charlotte at her level during a group photograph. Later, Charlotte was photographed laughing at something Camilla had said. These images, showing genuine warmth and connection, were splashed across newspapers the next day with headlines suggesting reconciliation and healing. While some cynics suggested the interactions were carefully staged for public relations purposes, those who knew the family understood that genuine progress had been made. The positive media coverage helped shift public perceptions slightly, with many people expressing hope that the family had truly worked through their issues. However, polls still showed that a significant portion of the public remained critical of Camilla. With the incident having caused lasting damage to her reputation, some commentators noted that this was particularly true among younger people and parents, who held firm views about appropriate treatment of children. Anne continued to play an active role in monitoring family dynamics and advocating for the younger generation. She established more regular communication channels with William and Catherine, ensuring that any concerns about the children could be addressed quickly. Anne also made herself more available to the other young royals in the extended family, wanting them to know they had someone they could trust if they ever felt uncomfortable or unsafe. Her role as the family's conscience and protector of the vulnerable became more formalized, though she remained characteristically humble about it, insisting she was simply doing what any decent person would do. The relationship between Anne and Camilla remained cool but civil. They had not discussed the incident directly since the immediate aftermath, and an unspoken understanding existed that they would maintain a professional distance. At family functions, they were polite but not warm, focusing their attention on their respective relationships with other family members. Rather than attempting to build a friendship that neither truly wanted, Charles regretted the permanent strain between his sister and his wife, but accepted that some damage could not be fully repaired. He appreciated that both women prioritized the family's functioning over their personal feelings toward each other. Charles himself had been deeply affected by the entire ordeal. The incident had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his wife, his family dynamics, and his own tendency to avoid difficult conflicts. He committed himself to being more present and attentive to his grandchildren, making sure they knew they could come to him with any problems. His relationship with William, which had sometimes been strained by differences in parenting philosophy and royal duty, actually strengthened through their shared handling of the crisis. They developed a deeper mutual respect and more open communication about family matters. Charlotte, remarkably resilient, emerged from the experience without apparent lasting trauma. Her parents' careful support, Anne's loving attention, and even Camilla's efforts to make amends had helped her process what happened in a healthy way. As she grew older, Charlotte would likely remember the incident as an unpleasant but ultimately manageable challenge rather than a defining trauma. The experience taught her that even adults make mistakes, that speaking up when something is wrong is important, that healing is possible with genuine effort. These were valuable lessons that would serve her well throughout her unique life as a royal princess. The incident's impact on the monarchy's public image gradually faded as news stories and scandals captured public attention. However, within royal circles and among those who studied the institution, the incident became an important case study. It demonstrated both the monarchy's vulnerability when private matters became public and its capacity to address problems when forced to do so. Some constitutional experts argued that the incident had actually strengthened the monarchy by showing it could hold itself accountable, while others contended it had revealed concerning power dynamics and a culture of protecting senior royals at the expense of transparency. Palace staff culture also shifted in subtle ways following the incident. There was greater awareness of the importance of speaking up when witnessing inappropriate behavior, balanced with understanding the serious consequences of unauthorized disclosures. Training was implemented to help staff navigate ethical dilemmas and utilize appropriate channels for reporting concerns. The incident had exposed gaps in oversight and accountability that needed to be addressed to maintain both the family's well-being and the institution's integrity. Anne reflected on the entire experience during a quiet evening at Gatcombe Park, her private residence. She had done what she believed was right, prioritizing Charlotte's well-being over family harmony or institutional reputation. The personal cost had been significant, including strained family relationships and intense public scrutiny, but she had no regrets. Anne believed that institutions were only as good as how they treated their most vulnerable members. Oh man. And that principle applied to families as much as to any other organization. If her actions had made the younger generation safer and sent a message that no one was above basic standards of decent behavior, then the discomfort and controversy had been worthwhile. Looking forward, Anne knew that her vigilance needed to continue. The incident with Charlotte had been resolved. But there would be other challenges, other moments when someone would need to speak up for those without power or voice. The monarchy's survival in the modern world depended on its ability to adapt, to hold itself to high ethical standards, and to demonstrate genuine care for all people, starting with its own family members. Anne was determined to play her part in that evolution, regardless of whether it made her popular or comfortable. The story of what had happened between Camilla and Charlotte, and the courageous guard who reported it, would be whispered about in palace corridors for years to come. For some, it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of stress and unexamined behavior. For others, it was an inspiring example of people doing the right thing, despite personal risk. For the family members directly involved, it was a painful, but ultimately transformative experience that reshaped relationships and priorities. The little princess at the center of it all continued to grow and thrive, surrounded by people who had proven they would protect her, teach her, and love her through difficulties. As seasons changed and years would pass, the incident became part of the family's complex history, a reminder of both human fallibility and the possibility of growth and redemption. Camilla continued her therapy and her efforts to be a better grandmother, finding her own authentic way to connect with the children. Charles worked to balance his love for his wife with his responsibilities to all family members. William and Catherine remained vigilant protectors of their children while teaching them resilience and forgiveness. Charlotte herself carried forward the lessons about speaking truth, expecting respect, and extending grace to those who make genuine efforts to do better. Anne, watching her great niece laugh and play during a family gathering a year later, felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The road had been difficult, the confrontations painful, and the public scrutiny exhausting, but the outcome was worth it. Charlotte was safe, heard, and thriving. The family had been forced to examine itself honestly and make necessary changes. Justice had been demanded and, in its imperfect human way, achieved. Anne had no illusions that all problems were solved or that future challenges would not arise. But she knew that a line had been drawn. The young and vulnerable members of the family had powerful advocates who would not remain silent when protection was needed. This knowledge brought in peace as she continued her royal duties, always watching, always ready to speak up when necessary. The title of Princess Royal carried many responsibilities, but none more important than ensuring that kindness, justice, and accountability existed within the family she served. Whatever challenges the future held, Anne was determined to face them with the same courage and conviction that had guided her through this difficult chapter. The young generation deserved nothing less than adults willing to fight for their well-being. And Anne would always be that person, no matter the personal cost.